Lady Eleanor Whitmore had learned to read a room by sound alone, the particular hush that fell when Lord Pembroke entered, the way the housemaid's footsteps quickened, the way even the old clock in the East Hall seemed to tick more carefully. Tonight, the house was too quiet. She sat beside Miss Charlotte's bed, the girl's sightless eyes turned toward the window as if she could still feel moonlight on her face, and Eleanor smoothed the coverlet with hands that would not quite stop trembling. "They think I don't hear them," Charlotte whispered. Whispering in the study. "About papers. About me. No one is taking you anywhere," Eleanor said, though she did not know if that was a promise she could keep. Below stairs, a new steward had arrived that morning, tall, quiet, dressed too plainly for a man who carried himself like he'd once given orders instead of taken them. He'd said little. But she had caught him watching her from the garden path, not with the idle curiosity of a servant sizing up the household, but with something sharper. Something that unsettled her. She did not know his name was Ashford. She did not know he had crossed an ocean, shed his title like a coat, and taken up a spade and a false name for one reason only, to see with his own eyes what his letters had only hinted at. She only knew that by nightfall, something in this house had shifted. And she was right. Because the man in the garden had already decided something in the hush of that evening, watching her guard a blind girl no one else troubled to protect, that he meant to marry her. He simply hadn't yet told her who he was. 3 weeks earlier, a letter had reached Duke Nathaniel Ashford in Lisbon, unsigned, ink smudged as though written in haste or fear. "Your sister is not safe. Lord Pembroke manages more than her fortune. Come home before there is nothing left to protect." He had not slept properly since. Nathaniel had been away from Ashford Hall for nearly 4 years, first the war, then the tangled business of shipping contracts that kept him abroad long after the fighting ended. He had trusted Pembroke, his late father's oldest friend, to serve as co-guardian to Charlotte, blind since a fever at 12, and had trusted the arrangement the way a man trusts a bridge he has never personally walked across. He arrived in Devon a fortnight later under a name that was not his own, Nathaniel Ash, land steward, recently of the East India Service, seeking honest work. It was easier, he reasoned, to see the truth of a house from its kitchens than from its drawing room. Servants spoke freely around a steward. They said nothing around a duke. What he found unsettled him more than the letter had. Pembroke moved through Ashford Hall like a man already counting its rooms as his own. He spoke of Charlotte in the clipped, clinical language of a solicitor discussing an inconvenient asset, her condition, her prospects, what's best managed quietly. He had brought in physicians Nathaniel did not recognize, men whose reports arrived sealed and were read behind closed doors. And then there was Lady Whitmore. He noticed her the first evening, in the walled garden behind the east wing, guiding Charlotte along a path worn smooth by repetition, describing the roses in such vivid, patient detail that the girl laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind Nathaniel hadn't heard from his sister since before the fever. 12 steps to the fountain, Eleanor was saying. "Do you hear it yet?" "I hear it," Charlotte said. "I hear you more." Nathaniel, pretending to prune a hedge he had no business pruning, felt something in his chest go quiet and still. He watched Eleanor for 3 days before he spoke to her directly, watched how she stood between Charlotte and Pembroke's cold instructions without ever raising her voice, how she memorized Charlotte's moods like a second language, how she never once treated blindness as an absence but as simply another way of seeing. By the 4th day, when Pembroke snapped at Eleanor in the hallway for coddling the girl into helplessness, and Eleanor answered without flinching, "Helplessness is what you'd prefer, my lord, since it is easier to manage," Nathaniel understood he was no longer merely investigating a household. He was falling for the one person in it who had no idea who he was. The reports began arriving with troubling regularity, thick envelopes sealed in wax, carried by a physician named Dr. Colby whom none of the household staff had ever seen treat a single patient in the village. Nathaniel, still known only as Ash the steward, made it his business to be near the study whenever Colby called. He carried firewood he did not need to carry, polished silver that did not need polishing, and listened. "The girl's melancholia worsens," he heard Pembroke say one afternoon, his voice pitched for Colby's ears alone. Her fits of temper, her refusal to accept her circumstances, write it as you did before. Unfit for independent management of her affairs. Will need the magistrate's signature within the month. She has no fits of temper, Nathaniel murmured to himself in the corridor, jaw tight. She has a governess who's frightened for her and no one to tell. He began watching Eleanor more closely, not from suspicion, but from something that felt dangerously close to trust. She kept a small ledger of her own, he noticed, tucked beneath Charlotte's Bible on the nightstand. Dates. Observations. Charlotte laughed today at the fountain story. Charlotte recited 3 verses of Wordsworth without error. Charlotte is not unfit. Charlotte is unheard. It was Clara Hastings, the parlor maid who had become Eleanor's fiercest ally, who first voiced what Eleanor herself had been circling for days. "You've seen how he looks at you," Clara said one evening, folding linens with more force than the task required. "The new steward. Ash. He looks at everyone that way. Like he's cataloguing the house. He looks at you like a man who's forgotten how to breathe properly." Clara paused. "And you look right back." Eleanor did not deny it, which was its own kind of confession. She found him again in the garden 2 evenings later, later than usual, Charlotte already asleep. He was not pruning anything this time, merely standing, hands clasped behind his back in a posture too straight for a steward, looking up at the house as though it owed him an answer. "You watch this family closely for a hired man," Eleanor said. "I watch it closely because something is wrong here," he answered, and there was no evasion in it. "Lord Pembroke sends for physicians who do not practice medicine. He speaks of Miss Charlotte as though she were a ledger entry to be balanced. I don't think you've missed any of that." "I haven't." Her voice dropped. "I've written it all down. I don't know who I'm meant to show it to." "Show me," he said, before he could stop himself. She studied him, really studied him, the calluses that didn't match a life of steward's work, the way he held himself like a man used to being obeyed. Suspicion and something warmer moved through her at once, tangled together. "Who are you, Mr. Ashe?" "Someone," he said quietly, "who wants very badly to protect this house. Trust me a little longer. Please." She should have refused. Instead, she found herself nodding. The ledger changed everything. Nathaniel read it by candlelight in the small steward's room he'd been given above the stables, Eleanor having pressed it into his hands with a wariness that told him exactly how much courage the act had cost her. Page after page, dated meticulously back 8 months, documented not a girl in decline but a girl thriving, reciting poetry, mastering new needlework patterns by touch, laughing, arguing, living, set directly against copies Eleanor had secretly made of Dr. Colby's reports, which described a patient sliding into helpless despair. The dates did not merely disagree. They contradicted each other on the very same days. That was the moment everything changed. He understood then that Pembroke was not merely neglectful or unkind, he was building a paper case, brick by fraudulent brick, to have Charlotte declared incompetent and her guardianship, and her fortune, transferred entirely into his own hands. And Eleanor, unknowingly, was the single obstacle standing in his way, the one witness whose testimony could unravel a year of forged medical opinion. Which meant Eleanor was in danger. Nathaniel did not sleep that night. By morning he had written to his solicitor in London, requesting the true records of Charlotte's guardianship and copies of every physician's license Pembroke claimed to have retained. He requested, too, a discreet inquiry into Dr. Colby's actual credentials, if the man had ever held any at all. He found Eleanor in the corridor outside Charlotte's room, pale, a folded letter clutched in her hand. "Lord Pembroke has dismissed me," she said, before he could speak. "Effective at week's end. He says I've overstepped, that Miss Charlotte's confused affections toward me are proof of my poor influence." Her composure cracked, just slightly, on the last words. "He means to bring in a new nurse. One who'll agree with whatever Dr. Colby writes." "He's afraid of you," Nathaniel said. "That's why he's removing you." You're the only honest record of who Charlotte truly is. And what good is that, if no one with any power believes a hired nurse over a lord? He wanted, more than he had wanted anything in 4 years of war and distance, to tell her the truth, that he was not Ash the steward but Nathaniel, Duke of Ashford, master of this house and everyone in it, and that her word would carry more weight than she knew the moment he stood beside her and said so plainly. But Pembroke had spies among the staff, and a duke revealed too soon was a duke who might be maneuvered against before the evidence was secured. He needed 1 more week. He needed the London papers to arrive. "Trust me a little longer," he said instead, the same words as before, and hated how thin they sounded against her fear. "You keep asking for trust, Mr. Ash, and giving me nothing in return." "I know." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her face up to his, close enough that the space between them felt suddenly, unbearably small. "But I will give you everything, Eleanor. I swear it." "Just not yet." She did not step back. That, too, was its own kind of answer. The week Nathaniel had asked for became the longest of Eleanor's life. Dismissed but not yet gone, Pembroke, in a small cruelty dressed as generosity, had allowed her to remain until her replacement arrived. For the girl's comfort during the transition, she spent her final days doing the only thing she knew how to do, loving Charlotte fiercely, and in the open, as if daring anyone to prove it harmful. "You're leaving," Charlotte said one afternoon, fingers tracing the embroidery on Eleanor's sleeve as they sat by the window. She always knew before anyone told her. "I heard Cook say it." "Not yet," Eleanor said. "And when I do, it won't be forever. I promise you that." "Everyone promises that. Then they don't come back." Charlotte's voice was small, stripped of its usual defiance. "Mama promised. Then the fever took her sense of me entirely, near enough. Papa promised, and then he simply died. Nathaniel promised he'd write more, and the letters grew thin, and then stopped." Eleanor's throat tightened at the name, the Duke's given name, spoken so easily, so bitterly, by a girl who did not know a man calling himself Ash slept above the stables not 30 yards from where they sat. "Your brother is closer than you think," Eleanor said carefully, though she did not fully understand why she believed it. "I don't think he's forgotten you at all." Meanwhile, Nathaniel's patience was fraying against Pembroke's growing boldness. The London solicitor's reply had arrived confirming what he'd feared. Dr. Colby held no medical license under that name in any registry in England, and the guardianship documents Pembroke had filed with the local magistrate bore a signature dated a full month before Nathaniel himself had granted any such authority by proxy from abroad. Forgery. Plain and provable. But Pembroke, sensing the walls closing, moved faster than expected. That evening, he summoned the magistrate directly to Ashford Hall, declaring he would not wait for a formal hearing. Charlotte's deteriorating condition, he said, demanded immediate action, and Miss Whitmore's imminent departure only proved the household was already unraveling beyond his control. Nathaniel, still in his steward's coat, stood at the edge of the drawing-room as the magistrate was led in, and understood with sick clarity that he had run out of time to wait for proof to arrive by post. He found Eleanor in the hallway, breathless with the same understanding. "He means to have it done tonight," she said. "Before your papers come. Before anyone can stop him. Then it ends tonight." Nathaniel's voice had changed, steadier, colder, no longer a steward's voice at all. "Eleanor, I need you to trust me one final time. Whatever you're about to see, whatever you're about to hear me called, don't doubt what stood between us." She searched his face, and for the first time, she thought she understood exactly what she was looking at. "Nathaniel," she whispered. He didn't deny it. The drawing-room fell silent when he walked in without the steward's stoop, without the borrowed name, his voice carrying the particular authority of a man who had commanded men in war and boardrooms alike. "Lord Pembroke," he said, "you may address the magistrate now on the matter of my sister's guardianship. I believe you'll want witnesses for what follows." Pembroke went the color of old parchment. "Nathaniel. You're meant to be abroad, you're dressed as a steward, watching you for 3 weeks, Nathaniel finished. Yes. I've seen a great deal, my lord. Enough to know that Dr. Colby holds no license to practice medicine anywhere in England, and that the proxy guardianship documents you filed bear a date predating any authority I gave you to file them. The magistrate, a careful man who disliked surprises even less than he disliked scandal, turned sharply toward Pembroke. Is this true? Fabrication, Pembroke snapped, though sweat had broken along his hairline. This man abandons his family for years and returns skulking as a servant, and you'll take his word. You'll find my solicitor's inquiry attached to the letter in my coat, Nathaniel said, producing it, along with sworn confirmation from the Royal College that no physician named Colby has held credentials in this county in a decade. And you'll find this, he nodded toward Eleanor, standing pale but unbowed in the doorway, Lady Whitmore's own daily record of my sister's condition. 8 months of it. Every entry contradicts Dr. Colby's reports on the very same dates. For one terrible moment, everything seemed to hang suspended, Pembroke's face contorting between fury and calculation, the magistrate flipping through Eleanor's careful pages with visibly narrowing eyes, Charlotte, led in by Clara, standing very still and listening to a version of her own life finally being told truthfully. She has been declared unfit, Pembroke tried again, weaker now, on medical. On forged medical opinion, the magistrate said flatly, commissioned, it appears, by the very man who stood to inherit her portion of the estate upon her incapacity. Lord Pembroke, I'll require you to remain in this house until proper authorities can be summoned. It happened faster than Eleanor could quite absorb, Pembroke's protests collapsing into silence, the magistrate's quiet instructions, Charlotte's hand finding Eleanor's and gripping it hard enough to bruise, whispering, you never left. You never left me, over and over, as if disbelief itself might undo the danger they'd survived. And through all of it, Nathaniel did not look away from Eleanor once. Later, when the house had quieted, when Pembroke had been led to a locked room to await the constable, Nathaniel found her again in the garden, beneath the same roses she had once described so vividly to a sister who could not see them. I should be furious with you, she said. Weeks of lies. You should be, he agreed. I'm hoping you'll be something else instead. And what's that, Your Grace? The title, spoken aloud at last, seemed to settle something between them rather than distance it. Willing, he said quietly, to hear what I have to ask you next. Lord Pembroke was removed from Ashford Hall within the week, his forgeries laid bare before the full magistrate's court, his claim to Charlotte's fortune dissolved along with his false physician's reports. Dr. Colby was never seen in Devon again. Charlotte, restored fully to her brother's guardianship, insisted on standing beside Eleanor when Nathaniel, no longer Ash the steward, but the Duke of Ashford in truth, asked Lady Eleanor Whitmore to marry him beneath the very roses she'd once described so patiently to a girl who saw the world through her voice alone. You loved me before you knew I could give you anything, he said. Title, fortune, none of it moved you. Only truth did. You loved me the same way, Eleanor answered. As a nurse. Nothing more. You were never nothing more, he said, and kissed her as the last of the danger finally, fully, let them go. What would you have done in her place?